We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close to providing peace and security for the galaxy.
Orson Callan Krennic was an Imperial officer and the director of the Imperial Military Department of Advanced Weapons Research, a fairly well-respected title within the ranks of the Imperial Armada. He was also a bit of an ambitious hothead whose contribution to the Galactic Empire, I believe, should not go unstated, which is to say, I admire him and his efforts despite some of his shortcomings, and though his death was unfortunately ironic, like many other officers of his age, his life and experience in the Republic and Empire is as long as it is in depth. This is his story. Born in 51 BBY on the mid-rim industrialised planet of Lexro in Setebran City during the era of the Galactic Republic, at 15 years old he enlisted in the Republic's Future Programme, which was an academy of sorts, if you will, that the Republic military used to identify those with promise and skills within certain fields. Krennic proved himself a promising, quick-witted and socially adept individual within the programme, earning himself recognition and a qualification which established him as a valuable asset within the Galactic Republic. As such, the role he would later end up occupying was essentially that of an overseer to the Republic's Corps of Engineers, managing the many large-scale construction efforts throughout the galaxy, which furthered the Republic's economic and societal endeavours all across the galactic plane. But Krennic, not one to be complacent, moved up to become a member of the Republic's Strategic Advisory Cell, which was a top-secret weapons discussion and research program, which dealt with the questions and solutions of how to develop and utilise giant tools of death and destruction in tactical warfare. I think you can see where this is going. By this time, the Clone Wars had officially begun, and it was at one of these meetings that schematics for a project in development by Count Dooku and the Separatist known as the Death Star was discussed by Krennic and his peers. Specific details about the Death Star's construction after this point are fuzzy at best, but it is known that the Republic began building the Death Star, with the central equatorial ring structure being completed. Krennic, of course, overseeing the project. Little did he know was just how much this project would affect his life from this point forward.
It's only an inkling of its destructive potential.
Construction efforts were, however, quite slow, with a litany of issues plaguing its development, especially in the area regarding the super laser, capable of destroying planets. Krennic, of course, was not one without ideas, and he approached a brilliant scientist and friend, Galen Walton Erso. Now, Galen is an influential figure within Krennic's story. During his time in the Futures program, Krennic befriended Erso, and despite their completely opposing personality types, they knew each other well, and both respected the other's abilities and approach to life.
Man of your talents?
It was during these troubled developments of the Death Star that Krennic attempted to recruit Galen into the development of a power source for the super laser, that power source being kyber crystals, crystallography being the field that Galen specialised in. Krennic's efforts, however, to bring his associate into the project was unsuccessful, as Galen, being a pacifist, chose to remain neutral throughout the Clone Wars. After subsequent betrayal from Separatist and Geonosian public figurehead Poggle the Lesser, the Clone Wars had all but subsided, and the Empire now reigned supreme. Krennic, still overseeing the construction of the Death Star, now aptly named Project Celestial Power, is growing slightly more fanatical and irritable as a result.
Fire!
But, to Krennic's benefit, a bit of time had passed, and with that, he did eventually manage to recruit Galen into the project, although only accepted as Krennic gave him the idea that the project was to bring power, support and stability to planets heavily affected by the Clone Wars, which, to state the obvious, was a lie. With Galen now under Krennic's jurisdiction, and research on kyber crystal utilisation for the super laser now well underway, you would think it would be smooth sailing for Krennic from here on out. Well, you forget. This is the Galactic Empire, and for Krennic, a new adversary would stand in his way. We'll have Tarkin. To say Krennic despised Tarkin would be putting it lightly. Krennic absolutely abhorred him, openly admitting it to his face and actively going out of his way on few occasions to attempt to get him demoted. Now with that, detailing every aspect of Krennic's life means this video would be hours long, so I will instead summarise these next few key moments in Krennic's life. The Emperor's impatience with Krennic and the incompletion of the Death Star was taking its toll on the man, so in order to increase the momentum of the project, he attempted multiple times to distance Galen's wife Lyra Erso from her husband, as Lyra was becoming aware of the true intentions of the project, warning Galen of such. Krennic during this time would also stage a fake attack on the Kyber Crystal research facility on the planet of Malpaz, as well as pin the blame on Tarkin for an attempt against Vader's life while he was accompanying the Emperor's enforcer on Geonosis to find out just who was sabotaging Project Stardust, another name given to the Death Star project. These attempts were futile and only saw Krennic's career getting harmed as a result. Nevertheless, Krennic was persistent despite the mounting pressure.
I will not fail.
With Lyra's warnings and Krennic's increased fanaticism about the project, Galen had already had some major suspicions over Krennic spying on his family. Krennic, of course, at this point was getting ready to permanently separate Galen, Lyra, and Jyn, Galen's daughter. But before he could do so, Krennic had learned from Tarkin that the bounty hunter Has Obit, whom Krennic formerly worked with and had exploited for his own personal gain, had made his way to Coruscant. Krennic, fearing his arrival there had something to do with the Ersos, quickly made his way to Coruscant, only to find that Galen, his wife, and their daughter had disappeared off the face of the planet. Krennic, needless to say, was livid, costing him his rank and friend. Oh yeah, did I mention all that was before he was ever even promoted to director? Well, with that, let's look into Krennic's life when he occupied that position. This next part is quite information heavy, so do sit back and listen carefully. But we start with Galen, whom upon escaping Krennic's wrath, had fled to the distant outer rim agrarian planet of Lamu to live out a simple life raising his daughter Jyn. Unfortunately for Galen, Krennic was persistent, and in 13 BBY he was able to track Galen.
You're a hard man to find, Galen. But farming. Really? Man of your talents?
Being accompanied by his death troopers, Krennic kidnapped his former friend in order to complete his work on the power source for the Death Star's super laser.
What is it you want?
The work has stalled. I need you to come back.
I won't do it, Krennic.
Also having Lyra exterminated in the process as she tried to prevent her husband getting captured. As for Jyn, her fate remains a mystery.
You're not taking him.
No, of course I'm not. I'm taking you all.
With Galen now unethically in his grasp and work on the weapon progressing to near completion, the secrecy of the entirety of Project Stardust was slowly but surely being compromised by the likes of Saw Gerrera and his partisans, with attacks being carried out on Imperial Kyber Crystal shipments, causing Saw and the partisans to learn the truth about the project. Going back to Galen, he would later send out pilot Bodhi Rook to inform the rebellion of a weakness within the superweapon's design, allowing it to be destroyed, a breach in the Empire's security that Tarkin would later be made aware of.
Apparently you've lost a rather talkative cargo pilot.
Also revealed was just how dangerous of a game Krennic was playing, believing he had the political leverage to overthrow Tarkin and those of a higher rank than him. With the Death Star now grossly over budget, well behind schedule and at a risk of being revealed prematurely to the entire galaxy, the super laser was installed, and construction on the Death Star was now completed, and now came time to test its destructive capabilities, with Krennic, Tarkin and many other high-ranking Imperial officers attending to watch exactly what they had been waiting years for, and the lucky target that was chosen was the holy city on the planet of Jeddah, and unfortunately for Krennic, the Emperor and Lord Vader were absent, Tarkin reminding him that that was for his own safety, should something go wrong.
One had hoped that he and Lord Vader might have been here for such an occasion.
And I thought it prudent to save you from any potential embarrassment.
Your concern's hardly warranted.
If saying it would only make it so.
With the weapons stationed in orbit and casting an imposing shadow across the surface, bearing down on the Holy City, the super laser was activated. Not to its full power, but only enough to completely level the entire city in a matter of mere milliseconds, obliterating everything well over many miles from the initial zone of contact, shooting dust, debris and an eruption of smoke and ash well into the outer atmosphere. The super laser worked flawlessly, leaving Tarkin and the other officers accompanying him very much impressed with the outcome, seeing a potential tool to inspire fear. Of course, for Krennic you would expect things to look up for him from this point forward. Well, not exactly. Upon successful completion of the test and subsequent eradication of the Holy City and the remaining aspect of Saw Gerrera and his partisans, Tarkin apologised to Krennic and remarked that his work exceeded all expectations, much to Krennic's delight.
I believe I owe you an apology, Director Krennic. Your work exceeds all expectations.
But that was short-lived, as Tarkin also announced that he would be taking immediate control of the Death Star, reasoning that the security breaches of the project have shown Krennic to be unfit to oversee the Death Star in a military position, due to his lack of care or willingness to deal with the issue.
But that was only an inkling of its destructive potential.
I will tell him that I will be taking control over the weapon I first spoke of years ago, effective immediately. I'm afraid the recent security breaches have laid bare your inadequacies as a military director.
Krennic, being Krennic, was furious, shouting at Tarkin and demanding that the Death Star was his achievement in front of all the other high-ranking officers in the room.
Stand here amidst my achievement, not yours!
The balls on this man. Tarkin's statement towards Krennic about the security breaches indicated that they originated from the planet of Edu, which was the facility Galen Erso operated from, for his kyber crystal research for the Death Star's super laser. Krennic, still enraged, decided to pay his associate a little visit and finally deal with the issue at hand. Krennic arrived at Edu with his squad of Death Troopers. Upon his arrival he had Galen line up his group of scientists and researchers, announcing that one among them was a traitor of the Empire and had been conspiring with the rebels to sabotage Project Stardust.
One of you betrayed the Empire. One of you has conspired with the pilot to send messages to the rebellion.
As no one chose to speak up, Krennic then ordered his Death Troopers to open fire on the entire group. That was when Galen stepped in, revealing that it was him that sent out the pilot, and that the others had nothing to do with it. Krennic, being as ruthless and as agitated as he was, opened fire on them anyway, with Galen being unable to do anything about it, as the people he worked with, and quite possibly respected, were executed before him by his former friend. But before Krennic could have Galen meet the same fate, a rebel attack was carried out on the facility, with Krennic fleeing and Galen getting caught up and killed as a result, but not before he had the chance to see his daughter Jyn one last time, and so forth ended the story of Galen Erso. Krennic's fate, however, was not far off. As we have established, Krennic was anything but complacent, but it was at this time that he was getting desperate, feeling that overseeing the Death Star would mean that he would amount to anything, and was really the only thing left he felt was worth striving for. After all, he had lost his lifetime friend, and was becoming the laughingstock of the Imperial Officer Corps, and thanks to Tarkin, that 20+ years dream of being responsible for the ultimate power in the galaxy was slipping from his grip. So in a last-ditch effort, Krennic was able to arrange a one-on-one meeting with Darth Vader in hopes of being able to convince the Sith Lord to speak to the Emperor about getting an audience with him to potentially usurp Tarkin's position of command. The meeting went about as well as you'd expect. While Vader certainly acknowledged the Death Star and its potential, he also pointed out its potential to create issues, stating that the destruction of Jeddah did not go as unnoticed as Krennic might have thought, and that Galen Erso's betrayal might have alerted the rebellion, with suspicions that the rebellion might have been aware of the test and the Death Star overall. Krennic trying to pin the blame on Tarkin for the destruction of Jeddah, to no avail. Vader ultimately reminding him that he should instead focus on making sure that the secrecy of the project had not been jeopardized by Galen Erso.
I expect you not to rest until you can assure the Emperor that Galen Erso has not compromised this weapon in any way.
Krennic, in a last-ditch effort, pleaded to Vader, asking if he was still in command and that he would get that audience with the Emperor he so desired.
So I'm still in command? You'll speak to the Emperor about it.
That was when Vader decided to put Krennic in his place and choke him with the Force, not intending on killing him, but just enough to startle him, remarking that he should be careful not to choke on his aspirations, a message that, while being an insult, is one that Krennic probably should have taken to heart. Either way, after this meeting, Krennic strangely wasn't without hope, knowing from Vader exactly what he needed to do to take on Tarkin, and that of course takes us to... In the last hours of his life, Krennic made his way to the top secret Imperial military research base on the outer rim planet of Scarif, as the plans and schematic readouts for the Death Star were kept there, fearing that the plans were vulnerable to being stolen should a rebel attack take place. Upon his arrival, Krennic was disappointed, to say the least, about the conditions at the base, with the officers and the garrison there being too content and lazy, heavily relying on the base's automated self-defense systems instead of actually dealing with potential issues themselves. Nevertheless, Krennic knew what he was there to do, and that was to make sure that Galen's betrayal had not compromised anything, calling up Galen's dispatches for an immediate inspection.
Galen Erso, I want every dispatch, every transmission he has ever sent called up for inspection.
While waiting for such, little did he know is that his suspicions about a rebel attack were indeed correct, as right at that time that Krennic arrived on Scarif, a rebel assault was just about to begin. While waiting to inspect Galen's past interactions, within the upper levels of the central Citadel Tower, Krennic observed repeating explosions off in the distance throughout the base, startling and confusing the other officers whose complacency had made them very unsure of what to do. Fortunately, Krennic scolded them to deploy the base's garrison in order to combat the rebel armies attacking the base.
Are we blind? Deploy the garrison! No!
Not long after, a large rebel fleet arrived above the atmosphere, which is when Krennic decided to send the base into lockdown, with the shield gate encircling the entire planet being closed in order to prevent any rebel ships from passing through. The ensuing battle was large and chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, but throughout, Krennic had learned that intruders Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso had broken into the data vault where the Death Star plans were kept. Krennic, along with 2 Death Troopers, desperately made their way to the vault.
Send my guard squadron into battle.
2 men with me now! Get that beach under control!
The 2 rebels and Krennic engaged each other in a firefight, taking out both Krennic's Death Troopers and leaving him without immediate assistance. The firefight within the vault was desperate, Krennic managing to send Andor plummeting to his supposed death, leaving only Jyn to continue climbing to the top of the tower to transmit the plans, Krennic in pursuit. It is also at this time that Tarkin arrived at Scarif with the Death Star, ready to eradicate the base to ensure that the rebels remained unsuccessful. Once Krennic made it to the top of the tower, he confronted Jyn, holding her at blaster point and remarking that she would never be able to send plans as long as the shield remained up.
The shield is up. Your signal will never reach the rebel base. All your ships in here will be destroyed. I lose nothing but time. You, on the other hand, die with the rebellion.
Jyn also revealed to Krennic that she was the daughter of Galen and Lyra, taking him by complete surprise and shock that even then, after death, Galen was still able to influence Krennic's life and work. But before Krennic could finish Jin, he was shot in the back by Cassian Andor, whom had survived his fall. Jin was then able to transmit the plans off the base into the rebel fleet, as the shield surrounding the planet was destroyed, after which Krennic was then left for dead on top of the tower, and that was when the Death Star entered Scarif's orbit, primed and ready to fire. And in those last moments, as Krennic crawled across the floor and stared up to the sky at the weapon he had worked on for so long, a weapon created to bring order, stability and fear and control to the galaxy. The irony of how this machine that he had spent so long overseeing the construction of was now bearing down upon him, ready to obliterate him into nothing. And so it did. Everyone who was on Scarif at that time met the same fate. Jin, Cassian, and one can only wonder just what Krennic was thinking in those last few seconds of his life before facing his ironic fate at the will of Tarkin. The super laser tore through the top of the tower where Krennic was and into the surface of Scarif, creating an explosion that ravaged the planet's surface. And in those mere seconds, Director Krennic was gone. And that's it. That is the story of Director Orson Callan Krennic. Krennic was a flawed but ambitious man, with a dedication to his work in the Galactic Empire that couldn't easily be matched by many others who worked alongside him. A victim of circumstance, consistently being undermined by the likes of Tarkin, Vader, Galen and many others throughout his life. And while many may have suffered at his hand, to him, people's lives were the price to pay to see his ambitions through. But one thing of Krennic that is certainly sure to live on will be his legacy. Without him, the Empire would have not been able to have built the second Death Star as quickly as it did, along with any other weapons that utilised kyber crystals as its primary source of power. And while some in the Empire would like you to forget about him, the impact he had and the story he left sure won't be forgotten for many years to come. If you're still here, thank you very much for watching this far in. So why not subscribe and help this video by liking and sharing it. This one took a longer while to make and your help is greatly appreciated. And with that, long live the Empire, and may the Force be with you.
Failure will find you explaining why to a far less patient audience.
I will not